Okay, this tonight is segment 3 of the study in Daniel. If you have your syllabus, it'll be the segment 3 to correspond with this. And you have your Bible. We'll be going right to Daniel chapter 1. And tonight we're going to continue. We'll finish chapter 1 tonight, but first we're going to kind of do a little bit more on the gods of Babylon. I call this the gods of Babylon part 2. We looked at segment 2. We looked at more of this, but we'll look more at this tonight. So in Daniel 1, 1 through 4 again, it says, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave to Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Last week we looked at the phrase of the house of his God. This week I'd like to look at this phrase that's in here called the land of Shinar. When we studied this, I actually was kind of amazed to find this, that the word Shinar only appears 6 other times in the entire Bible. So then the fact that that's used here in Daniel, where it doesn't say he came to the land of Babylon, it doesn't say he came to the land of the Chaldeans, it doesn't say he came to the land of Akkad, it specifically says the land of Shinar. So I want to just quickly just do a brief background in the Bible of the land of Shinar. And it's used 6 other places. And the first one, if you have your Bible, you can follow these along. I'll put them on the screen, but go ahead and follow along. In Genesis chapter 10 is the first use of Shinar, and this is, I think, pretty significant. And it's Genesis 10, 8 through 10. It says, Cush became the father of Nimrod. He became a mighty one on the earth. He was a mighty hunter before Yahweh. Therefore, it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before Yahweh, the beginning of his kingdom was Babel and Erech and Akkad and Calneh in the land of Shinar. Babel, of course, is Babylon. Erech is a city there, and many today believe that the modern country of Iraq, that the etymology for today's country of Iraq goes back to this Genesis 10, Erech. Akkad is another term for this area, and as I showed you last week or the week before, that many of the historical writings, the cuneiform writings, refer to this land as Akkad, referring to Nebuchadnezzar as the king of Akkad. But these all stem back to this Genesis chapter 10. All of this is this land of Shinar. Here's a map. It's this land between the Euphrates and the Tigris River. This what's I think was called the cradle of civilization, and this is where Nimrod started this Babel. And the next use of Shinar continues really as the story is how Babylon got its name, and that's in Genesis chapter 11. It says they came east, and as they journeyed, they found a plain in the land of Shinar. This is the second use of Shinar in the Bible. And they settled there. And they said, come, let us build for ourselves a city and a tower whose top will reach into heaven. And let us make for ourselves a name. Otherwise, we will be scattered abroad over the face of the whole earth. Yahweh came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built. Yahweh said, behold, they are one people, and they all have the same language, and this is what they begin to do. And now nothing which they purpose to do will be impossible for them. Come, let us go down and there confuse their language so that they will not understand one another's speech. So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of the whole earth, and they stopped building the city. Therefore, its name was called Babel, because there Yahweh confused the language of the whole earth, and from there Yahweh scattered them abroad over the face of the whole earth. So this is how Babylon got its name. It's confusion. It was the confusion that God brought, and that's how Babylon got its name. This is the second use of Shinar. Babylon is the first world kingdom in the Bible, and as we saw last week, it's the last world kingdom that's going to be here in the end of the age. Whatever that is, God calls it Babylon in the book of Revelation. And this is the second use of Shinar. I think the third use is also significant. I'm not going to read this with you, but here in Genesis 14, it's used twice in the same context. And this is, it came about in the days of Armaphel, king of Shinar. And this is Shinar and Arioch, king of Elsar, 4 against 5 kings. This king of Shinar was the main instigator in this war. And this also is significant. The first world war in the Bible, Shinar comes up. It was the first world war was this, and this of course is when they took Lot, Abraham took his servant and they went and recovered him. But this is the first battle in the Bible, the first war, and the land of Shinar comes up. The fourth use of the land of Shinar also is interesting. This is after Joshua goes into the promised land, and the children of Israel, they win in Jericho, and then they're going to go up against the king of Ai, and they're like, that's nothing. We beat Jericho. We only need to send 3,000 men. That's going to be an easy peasy, right? And they get defeated, and 36 people die, and Joshua tears his garment and they say, why, God, why this happened? And God says, because you got someone in your camp who took something he wasn't supposed to take, and I told him not to take. And this was Achan, the man Achan, and his family. And what he said was, Joshua said, what'd you take? And this is what he says in Joshua 7:21. When I saw among the spoil a beautiful mantle from Shinar, and 200 shekels of gold, and a bar of gold, 50 shekels in weight, and I coveted them and took them. I don't know what that means. Just another interesting use of Shinar was the first time when they went to the promised land. Why they got defeated by the king of Ai was because the family of Achan had taken a mantle from Shinar. An interesting use. The next one's prophetic. You can read this for yourself in Isaiah 11:11 about God recovering his people from Shinar. But the last one I think is there's of course Daniel's the sixth one. This would be the seventh. Is Zechariah chapter 5 verse 11. And this I'd like to read with you. This is the prophecy in Zechariah. Again, end time prophecy. And the angel who was speaking with me went out, and he said to me, lift up now your eyes and see what is going forth. And I said, what is it? And he said, it is an ephah going forth. An ephah is like a basket. I figure a basket. It's a container, right? And again, he said, this is their appearance in all the land. And behold, a lead cover was lifted up. So he saw this ephah, he saw this container, which had this lid, and the lid is lifted up in this vision to Zechariah. And there's a woman sitting in the ephah. And then he says, what does he say about this woman? This woman in this ephah, this is wickedness, was what this is. And he threw her down in the middle of the ephah and cast the lead weight on its opening. Then I lifted up my eyes and looked, and there were two women coming out with the wind in their wings, and they had wings like the wings of a stork, and they lifted up the ephah between the earth and the heavens. I said to the angel who was speaking to me, where are they taking the ephah? Where are they taking this basket with wickedness inside it? And he said to me, to build a temple for her in the land of Shinar. When it is prepared, she will be set there on her own pedestal. And I believe this actually is referring to an end times, the woman that we read about last week in Revelation 17 and 18. But again, the land of Shinar, and those are the only uses of Shinar in the Bible. So I think that's significant. You can take that, study it for yourself, but just a little bit about that. Now, as far as the gods of Babylon versus the true God, these notes here are actually I had in your syllabus under segment 2, but I thought it was more logical to cover this tonight. But this overview is in your syllabus. It's under chapter 2, segment 2 of your syllabus. And that is that the first 6 chapters of Daniel, here's a brief overview of what we'll be looking at in these first 6 chapters. And every one of them, there's an underlying theme, and that is the gods of Babylon versus Yahweh, versus the true God. And here's just a quick little overview of these things. In Daniel chapter 1, what we read about in Daniel chapter 1 is Daniel and his friends would not eat the king's food and defile themselves, as it could have been, I think, we'll look at part of the Babylonian idolatrous culture. And as a result, God gave Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah intelligence, understanding, and Nebuchadnezzar found them 10 times better than all the magicians and conjurers who would have been following the Babylonian gods. Also, we're going to look at tonight, a little later on, the name changes in the book of Daniel are really the Yahweh versus the gods of Babylon. The names of Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Hananiah all have Yahweh, or the true God's name, in their name. All the Babylonian names that are given to them have the gods of Babylon in their names. So you see that here in the first chapter in that too. In chapter 2, and we'll look at this next week, or next segment, but Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. He can't remember the dream. He wants to know what the dreams and the interpretation. So he calls all the wise men of Babylon who follow the gods of Babylon to tell him the dream, and no one could declare it to the king. They tell him nobody can declare it to you, king, except the gods. Well, they're supposed to represent the gods, and they can't give him the dream. Daniel receives the dream, the revelation from the true God, and he says to Nebuchadnezzar, there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. So again, you have the true God versus the gods of Babylon. And chapter 3 is that record of Nebuchadnezzar builds the image of gold, right? And he commands everyone to fall down and worship here. Here's idolatry. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they won't bow. And they are thrown into the burning fiery furnace. And the king says to them, do not serve gods. You don't serve my gods or your golden image. And he says, what God can deliver you out of my hands? And of course, we know the record, the true God delivers them. And Nebuchadnezzar recognizes that the God, that is the true God. Chapter 4, many years later, Nebuchadnezzar declares, he gets full of himself, and he declares, is not this Babylon built by my power and the glory of my majesty? He exalts himself, and then he's driven away for 7 years, and he comes humbly, and in the end, he praises the true God in Daniel chapter 4. Daniel chapter 5, you're towards the end of the book of Daniel, chronologically, and this is King Belshazzar holds a great feast. This is a descendant of Nebuchadnezzar, and he's using the golden vessels taken from Yahweh's temple. They drink wine from it, and it says that they were praising the gods of gold, silver, bronze, wood, and stone. And then there's a writing on the wall, right? And none of the wise men of Babylon can interpret it. Daniel interprets the writing, and Daniel declares the Most High rules in the realm of mankind and sets it over to whom he wishes. Babylon's defeated that night by the Medes and the Persians. So again, the true God versus the false gods. And then, of course, Daniel chapter 6 is Daniel and the lion's den. And they make a decree that no one can make any petition to any god for 30 days. Daniel continues praying. He's caught. He gets put in the lion den. And in the end, Darius, the Mede, declares Daniel's God is the living God. So that gives you a little overview of these first 6 chapters of Daniel. And I think in an overview look, it's the gods of Babylon versus the true God. And we'll see this as we go through it. But for tonight, more gods of Babylon. Last segment, we looked at one goddess, Ishtar. Tonight, I want to focus on these 2 gods. One is Marduk or Bel, And he is in the Mesopotamian religion, he was the chief god of the city of Babylon, the national god of Babylon, and as such, he's eventually simply called Bel, or the word Bel means Lord. So in some writings, you'll see him referred to as Marduk, others you'll see him referred to as Bel, but this is the chief god of Babylon. This was Nebuchadnezzar's god. And then you have Nabu or Nebo, and that god was the son of Marduk, another major deity in the Babylonian devotion. And again, we have way back here in the time of Babylon, God the Father, God the Son, Bel and Nebo, these two gods of Babylon. And these come up in the Bible and they come up in writings. And here's just a little map. I was looking for this map. It comes from this Livius.org, and I was looking into it. I don't know how they came about knowing that this was the city of Babylon. Looking at it, it looks to me as though, although I couldn't verify that this was taken from, the whole city of Babylon is an archaeological dig where they have, uncovered ruins and can see what the city of Babylon would have looked up. That Babylon that is now in Iraq, that is in ruins, that they've uncovered and now is a archaeological site you could visit, is the same Babylon that we're looking at here, what's uncovered in ruins right now. And from this, they've developed what they believe was what the city was like. And of course, we looked at the Ishtar Gate last week, but I wanted to point out this week that in the center of Babylon was this Ziggurat and Menaki, which is dedicated to Bel. That was the center of Babylon. And then throughout the city are all these temples of all these different gods. You have the temple dedicated to Nabu. You have a temple dedicated to Marduk. It's interesting on this map, again, how true it is, I don't know. They have 2 temples for Ishtar. Ishtar got twice as many temples as any other gods. So I guess she was a popular place to visit when you were in Babylon, the temple of Ishtar. So that's a little bit, again, I don't know how accurate this map is, but that's where I got it from. It's actually, if you want to go to that site that's here on the page, there's a pretty good little write-up about Babylon and the history if you're interested in reading up on it. It's actually pretty good. So in some of the cuneiform writings, I think one of the things that stuck out to me in reading these writings that are in these clay tablets, these cylinders, was that these Babylonian Persian kings, they are filled with references to Babylonian and Mesopotamian gods. Gods such as Sin, Marduk and Bel, Nebu or Nebo. And these kings were entrenched in religious worship and allegiance to these gods. And these are just little brief things that I pulled out. There's a lot more, but here's ones that stuck out to me. From the Jerusalem Chronicle, is written in the month of Nesu, he took the hands of Bel and the son of Bel, that's Marduk and Nebo, and celebrated the Akitu festival. And from the Nabonidus Chronicle, it says, Nabu came from Borsippa for the procession of Bel. Bel came out. Again, these are gods written into these writings of these Babylonian kings. And here's from the Nabonidus Cylinder. In the beginning of my everlasting reign, they sent me a dream. Marduk, the great lord, and Sin, the luminary heaven and netherworlds, stood together. Marduk spoke to me, Nabonidus, king of Babylon. So this is from the writing of the Nabonidus Chronicle. And then from the Cyrus Cylinder, this is the Persian king, Cyrus. He actually, and we'll look at this later, the whole thing with Belshazzar and Cyrus and what happened there, how Belshazzar was ruling, even though Nabonidus supposedly was king historically. We'll look at it, and it really has to do with these gods. It has to do with the gods of Babylon. But Cyrus wrote, the king of the universe, the great king, whose reign Bel or Marduk and Nebu love. and with whose kingship the joy they concern themselves. That's from the Cyrus Cylinder. Again, just a little smidget of what's written in some of those, how these kings is woven into the Babylonian culture, is these gods. And then you have the Apocrypha. And two of the writings of the Apocrypha I want to point out. Again, I'm not going to read them all, just little bits of it. The one here, and these are from your appendix too, the one is the letter of Jeremiah. Again, these are not biblical writings, but these are about the time that we're talking about of Babylon and the time of Daniel. And I don't know if this was written, who this was written by, but what it says here is a copy of an epistle which Jeremy sent unto them, which were led captives into Babylon by the king of Babylonians, to certify them as it was commanded him of God. Because of the sins which they have committed before God, ye shall be led away captive into Babylon by Nebuchadnezzar, king of the Babylonians. So when ye be come to Babylon, ye shall remain there many years for a long season, namely 7 generations. And after that, I will bring you away peaceably from thence. Now you shall see in Babylon gods of silver and of gold and of wood, borne upon shoulders, which cause the nations to fear. And then in verse 40 and 41, how should a man think and say that they are gods, even when the Chaldeans themselves dishonor them? Who, if they shall see one dumb cannot speak, they bring him and entreat Bel that he may speak, as though he were able to understand. And then in verse 64 and 65, wherefore it is neither to be supposed nor said that they are gods, seeing they are able neither to judge causes nor to do good unto men. Knowing therefore they are no gods, fear them not. That's just a little bit of that you could read on your own if you want to, a little bit from this letter of Jeremiah in Apocrypha writings, where you can see this whole God versus the true God versus the gods of Babylon. One of my favorite Apocrypha writings is Bel and the Dragon. Bel, of course, is Marduk, is the god of Babylon. And this is a story. Now, this, I am 99.9999% sure is a made-up story, but it's a great story. If you want to read it, it's really kind of a fun story. And here is just how and I'll tell you later how it ends, but here's the beginning of the Apocrypha writing, Bel and the Dragon. And King Astyages was gathered to his fathers, and Cyrus of Persia received his kingdom. So this is written at the end of the time of the book of Daniel. And Daniel conversed with the king and was honored above all his friends. Now the Babylonians had an idol called Bel, and they were spent upon him every day 12 great measures of flour and 40 sheep and 6 wines of vessel. These are food sacrificed to the gods of Babylon, to Bel. Every day he was given 12 measures of flour, 40 sheep, 6 vessels of wine. And the king worshipped it, Cyrus, and daily went to adore it. But Daniel worshipped his own God. And the king said unto Daniel, why dost thou not worship Bel? And Daniel answered and said, because I may not worship idols made with hands, but the living God, who created heaven and earth and hath sovereignty over all the flesh. Then the king said unto him, you don't think that Bel is a living God? Don't you see how much he eats and drinks every day? And now you go to read the rest of the story. Daniel laughs and says, oh, king, Bel's not eating that food. Those priests and all their kids, they're eating the food. And the king says, no, let me see. So they put the food out in the middle of the night, and the next morning the food's gone. And the king says, Daniel, see, Bel ate the food. And Daniel says, oh, king, come with me. And he shows him footsteps, and they find this hidden door that goes down to where all the priests and all their family are munching on the food. And the king kills them all. He gets mad. It's a great story. And then the king says, well, surely the dragon, we worship the dragon's a living being. It's right here. He's a god. And Daniel says, okay. And Daniel gives, he gives the dragon something to eat, and the dragon dies. So it's a great, again, fun story. And then it ends with Daniel in the lion's den. So it's kind of weird there. But again, it's a fun Apocrypha writing in light of this, looking at the gods of Babylon versus the true God. I thought I'd bring that up for your pleasure and enjoyment. If you want something to read, read the whole Bel and the Dragon. It's a great story. You should make a movie of it. It's a good thing. Anyways, there's a little bit of some of the Apocrypha writings regarding the gods of Babylon. Now, this is not Apocrypha, but this is pretty cool. And this is, I'm only going to do a bit of this with you, but I highly recommend after tonight that you read Isaiah's chapter 45, 46, 47, and 48. I think these are a unit. I think it's all one section of Isaiah to be understood as a section of Isaiah. But I want you to remember, Isaiah wrote this sometime, I think from what I understand, sometime between 710 and 700 BC. So Daniel wrote what's written in Isaiah 45, 46, 47, and 48, 100 years before Daniel was brought into captivity. Isaiah wrote this, Isaiah received this prophecy 100 years before Nebuchadnezzar became king of Babylon and brought the children of Judah into captivity. Isaiah wrote this 170 years before Cyrus, king of Persia, rose in power and delivered the children of Israel from Babylon. Many people have a problem or don't, they disregard Isaiah. They think that this was written after the fact because of the perfection that Isaiah wrote this. But I think this is to be understood in a whole context of God's prophetic foreknow, how God foretold the future. And in that, God says, I'm God. And these other gods are not gods. And in here, Isaiah prophesies about the fall of Bel and Nebu, the gods of Babylon, and of Cyrus, and of God's deliverance out of Babylon and the return of Judah. Happened, and he wrote this 170 years before that happened. It's amazing prophecy, but it is dealing with this time of Daniel. So here's a little snippet of these 4 chapters put together. I thought I'd look, and then you can go back and read this on your own. But Isaiah 45, and if you want to follow this in your Bible, you can. I'm doing highlights of these chapters. Isaiah 45, it says, thus says Yahweh to Cyrus. He names him. He names Cyrus the Persian 170 years before Cyrus the Persian is anything, right? Yahweh says to Cyrus, his anointed, whom I have taken by the right hand to subdue nations before him, to loose the loins of kings, to open doors before him, so that the gates will not be shut. I will give you the treasures of darkness and hidden wealth of secret places, so that you may know. Why is God telling the children of Israel this? So that you may know that it is I, Yahweh, the God of Israel, who calls you by your name. I am Yahweh, and there is no other. Besides me, there is no God. I will gird you through what you have not known me. He's talking to Cyrus. I'm going to gird you, though you don't even know who I am. That men may know from the rising to the setting of the sun that there is no one besides me. I am Yahweh. There is no other. Then you go to chapter 46. Again, this is continuing with this deliverance out of the land of the Chaldeans and the gods of Babylon. Isaiah chapter 46 says, Bel has bowed down. That's Marduk. That's that chief god of Babylon. Nebu, that's the son of Bel, stoops over. Their images are consigned to the beasts and the cattle. The things that you carry are burdensome, a load for the weary beast. They stooped over. They have bowed down altogether. They could not rescue the burdens, but they themselves have gone into captivity. They went into captivity when the Persians came in. And Isaiah is prophesying about this 170 years before. They themselves are going to go into captivity. The gods of Babylon, to whom you would like, whom will you liken me, God says, and equal and compare me, that we would be alike. Those who lavish gold from the purse and weigh silver on the scale hire a goldsmith, and he makes it into a god. They bow down, indeed, they worship it. They lift up the shoulder and carry it. They set it in its place, and it stands there. It does not move from its place. Though one may cry to it, you can cry to these gods, it cannot answer. It can't deliver from his distress. Remember this, God says, and be assured. Recall it to mind, you transgressors. Remember the former things long past, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God. There's no one like me declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times the things which have not been done, saying, my purpose will be established, and I will accomplish my good pleasure. Now, I also want to point out that, Isaiah's prophetic. I think it could be, as we've looked at, I think it could have dual prophecy. I think it could also be referring to the end times Babylon and God's deliverance, that he's going to bring us out of Babylon, and the world out of Babylon in the end. I don't know. Look at it yourself. But he continues on in chapter 47 to the Babylonians. Babylon isn't even the empire right now. The Assyrian Empire is ruling when Isaiah is writing this. But he's talking about the Babylonians. And he says, come down and sit in the dust, O virgin daughter of Babylon. Sit on the ground without a throne, O daughter of the Chaldeans. For you will no longer be called tender and delicate. Take the millstones and grind meal. Remove your veil. Strip off the skirt. Uncover the leg. Cross the rivers. Your nakedness will be uncovered. Your shame will be exposed. I will take vengeance and will not spare a man. Our Redeemer, Yahweh of hosts is his name, the Holy One of Israel. Sit silently and go into darkness, O daughter of the Chaldeans. For you will no longer be called Queen of the Kingdoms. This reminds me of the revelation that we looked at last week about Babylon. You will no longer be called Queen of the Kingdoms. I was angry with my people. I profaned my heritage and gave them into your hand. You did not show mercy on them. On the age you made your yoke very heavy, yet you said, I will be a queen forever. These things you did not consider nor remember the outcome of them. Now then, hear this, you sensual one who dwells securely, who says in your heart, I am, and there's no one besides me. I will sit as a widow, nor no loss of children. But these two things will come on you suddenly in one day. Loss of children and widowhood. They will come on you in full measure, in spite of your many sorceries, in spite of the great power of your spells. You felt secure in your wickedness, said, no one sees me. Your wisdom and knowledge, they have deluded you, for you have said in your heart, I am, and there's no one besides me. This guy, Isaiah wrote this 170 years before they came out of Babylon. This is amazing prophecy. Isaiah 48, he continues on. Therefore I declared from long ago, before I took place, I proclaimed to you, so that you would not say, my idol has done them, and my graven images and my molten images have commanded them. You have heard, look at all this, and you will not declare it. I proclaim to you new things from this time, even hidden things which you have not known. Assemble, all of you, and listen. Who among you has declared these things? Yahweh loves him. He will carry out his good pleasure on Babylon. Babylon's not the nation right now ruling. Assyria is. But God is prophesying about this future event. He's going to carry out his good pleasure on Babylon, and his army will be against the Chaldeans. Even I have spoken. I indeed have called him. I have brought him, and he will make his way successful. Go forth from Babylon. Flee from the Chaldeans, declares the sound of the joyful shouting. Proclaim this. Send it out to the end of the earth. Say, Yahweh has redeemed his servant Jacob. Isn't that awesome? That is Isaiah chapter 45, 46, 47, and 48. Isaiah prophesying 100 to 170 years before the events even take place, where God defeats Babylon. He defeats the gods of Babylon. He defeats the queen of heaven and brings his people back. Again, I think this can also telescope to the future. You can look at that on your own, just a little bits of Isaiah. I love how God speaks there in prophecy about God versus the gods of Babylon. So that's a little bit about that. Now, let's continue on in chapter 1, finish this out. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. The Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, along with some of the vessels of the house of God, and he brought them to the land of Shinar, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels into the treasury of his God. Then the king ordered Ashpenaz, the chief of his officials, to bring in some of the sons of Israel, including some of the royal family and the nobles, youths in whom was no defect, who were good looking, showing intelligence in every branch of wisdom, endowed with understanding and discerning knowledge, and who had ability for serving in the king's court. And he ordered him to teach them the literature and language of the Chaldeans. So these youths, Daniel, Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael, and others, included some of the royal family. Now, whether Daniel was or these guys, I'm not sure who was of the royal family, and of the nobles. Ashpenaz, it says, was the chief of Nebuchadnezzar's officials here in the NASB. King James Version calls him the master of his eunuchs. And the ESV calls this Ashpenaz, who these guys came under, the chief eunuch. So my question is, were these young men forced to become eunuchs? I know some have declared that. It doesn't say that here. I don't know if that's true, but I think it's worth a consideration, especially because, again, going back to Isaiah, if you go back to Isaiah, if you remember, after King Hezekiah had won his defeat against the Assyrians, after he had been healed, he put the fig leaves on him and was healed. There was a time when the king Merodach-Baladan is what it says in Isaiah, and many people believe that this king, this representative from Babylon, was Marduk-Habal-Adini, named in Chaldean monuments. And actually, scholars believe that that king was trying to overthrow the Assyrian government. Whether it's true or not, but this is who time frame that fits with this Merodach-Baladan came to Hezekiah in Jerusalem, and he came and Isaiah says, who were those guys, and what did they want, and what'd you do? And Hezekiah says, oh, these were royalty from Babylon, and I showed them everything. I showed them the treasures. I showed them everything in God's house. I showed them all the treasuries of God's house. And then here's the prophecy that Isaiah gives to Hezekiah. Isaiah 39, 5-7. Then Isaiah said to Hezekiah, hear the word of Yahweh of hosts. Behold, the days are coming when all that is in your house, talking about the house of David, Hezekiah was a descendant of David, and that which your fathers have stored up till his days shall be carried to Babylon. Nothing shall be left, says Yahweh. And some of your own sons out of the house of royalty of Hezekiah's household, some of your own sons who will come forth from you, whom you will father, shall be taken away, and they will be eunuchs in the palace of the king of Babylon. So, an interesting thing. Again, it never says this is what happened to Daniel. I don't know. There's nothing about Daniel ever marrying or having a wife. Some have suggested that in Matthew 19, when Jesus makes this statement, that he's actually talking about Daniel. Again, I'm not saying this is true. I'm just putting it out there that I've heard this. I think there might be some merit to it. Matthew 19:12 says, Jesus said, for there are eunuchs who were born that way from their mother's womb, and there are eunuchs who were made eunuchs by men. And there are also eunuchs who made themselves eunuchs for the sake of the kingdom of God. He who's able to accept this, let him accept it. So there's some who believe that that statement by Jesus is referring back to this time when these young men were brought out of Babylon. Again, I don't know if that's true. I think there's some merit to it based on what's written on Isaiah and how the ESV and the King James Version translate there. So I leave that for you to look at, to think about. let's move on. Daniel chapter 1, verse 5 through 7 says, the king appointed for them a daily ration from the king's choice food and from the wine which he drank, and appointed that they should be educated 3 years, at the end of which they were to enter the king's personal service. Now, among them from the sons of Judah were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Then the commander of the officials assigned new names to them. To Daniel, he was assigned the name Belteshazzar. To Hananiah, Shadrach. To Mishael, Meshach. And to Azariah, Abednego. These young men were taken away from their home. They're carried away to a foreign country filled with idolatry. They were possibly castrated. They were possibly made eunuchs. I don't know, but there's a possibility of that. They were taught the literature and language of the Chaldeans, and they were even given new names. You see how the Babylonians wanted to influence their culture on Daniel and these young men. So to me, this is so amazing that Daniel, in spite of all this, he remained faithful to the true God as this just an incredible man. And they were assigned new Babylonians names. Now, here's just a little bit about their names. Their Hebrew names all included a term for the true God. Their Babylonian names included names associated with Babylonian gods. And here in the chart, I think this is in your syllabus, Yah is the shortened version of the name of God, Yahweh. El, the name El is the Hebrew name, means strength, power, or might. It's the name of God meaning the mighty. It's one of the names of God, El. Here's some of Babylonian gods' names. Aku is the moon god. Bel is possibly the same as Marduk, a primary god of Babylon, which we've looked at tonight. And then Nebo, also as Nabu, is the son of Marduk. These are some gods of Babylon. Now, check this out. The Hebrew name Daniel, El, means El, God is my judge. Belteshazzar, that his name was changed to, means Bel is the keeper of secrets. Hananiah, Yah, means Yah or Yahweh is gracious. Shadrach means the command of Aku, who's the moon god. Mishael means who is what El is. El, the name of God. Who is what El is. Meshach means who is as Aku is, who's the moon god of the Babylonians. Azariah means Yah has helped. Abednego means slave of the god Nebo. So you see how you have the true God versus the Babylonian gods. And their name changes, that their names are changed to. So this is what has happened to Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So what do you do in that situation? You stay separate. You live in the world. You live in an evil world. You live in a world full of idolatry. You live in a world that is filled with falseness and sin, yet you live separate. And that's what Daniel does. From right off the bat, this is how he decides to live. And in Daniel chapter 1, verse 8, but Daniel made up his mind that he would not defile himself with the king's choice food or with the wine which he drank. So he sought permission from the commander of the officials that he might not defile himself. Now God granted Daniel favor and compassion in the sight of the commanders of the officials. And the commander of the officials said to Daniel, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has appointed your food and your drink. For why should he see your faces looking more haggard than the youths who are your own age? Then you would make me forfeit my head to the king. So he's like, Daniel, if you don't eat the food, I could be in big trouble here. And Daniel said to the overseer, whom the commander of the officials had appointed over Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, please test your servants for 10 days and let us be given some vegetables to eat and water to drink. We'll just eat vegetables and water. Then let our appearance be observed in your presence and the appearance of the youths who are eating the king's choice food. And deal with your servants according to what you see. Give us 10 days. After 10 days, if we don't know, then but test it out. So my question to you is, why did Daniel refuse the king's food and drink? I think there's two possibilities. Maybe they're both true. One is that why would he have been defiled for eating the king's food? One could be because it's a dietary restriction of the law of Moses. And I've given you the verses, Leviticus 11, chapter 11, and Deuteronomy 14, 3 through 21, give you the Mosaic law of restricted food that you can't eat. You've heard of these, like pork, shellfish, all the different things that are listed in the dietary restrictions of the law. It could be that this was included in this food of the king's choice food, and therefore Daniel refused to eat it. But looking at Babylon and the gods of Babylon and this practice of eating food offered unto idols, I think it's a very good possibility that the reason Daniel didn't defile it was not strictly because dietary restrictions of the law of Moses, but because this food was offered unto idols. And this practice, I don't really understand this, but it's a big deal in Scripture about eating food sacrificed to idols. And I give it's in the New Testament, especially during the time of the Romans and the Greeks, in Acts 15 through 20, 1 Corinthians 8, the entire chapter 10, 6 through 8, 1 Corinthians 14, Revelation 2, all mentions this in the practice of eating food sacrificed unto idols. And it's also in the Mosaic law. In fact, I put on here, because this I actually have just been doing my yearly reading of the Bible, and I read this in Exodus. I said, oh my gosh, if you follow the record in Exodus, Moses goes up, right? He gets the 10 Commandments, and he goes up, and then they make the golden calf, right? And then he comes back on, and then he goes back up for another 40 days. And this is one of the first things that God says to him the second go round when he comes back up in the second 40 days. And what God says to Moses in Exodus 34, 12 through 16 is, watch yourself that you make no covenant with the inhabitants of the land into which you are going, or it will become a snare in your midst. But rather, you are to tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, cut down their Asherim, for you shall not worship any other God, for Yahweh, whose name is jealous, is a jealous God. Otherwise, you might make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they would play the harlot with their gods and sacrifice to their gods, and someone might invite you to eat of his sacrifice. And you may take some of his daughters for your sons, and his daughters might play the harlot with their gods, and cause your sons also to play the harlot with their gods. Again, I don't understand this whole thing with food sacrificed unto idols. In our day and time, how it relates. But it was a big deal. In Corinthians, this is one of the things where Paul says, be ye separate, come out from them. As part of the separation in Corinthians that are told. So, I wonder today, is there some correlation? And I don't have enough knowledge or wisdom on that. But this was a big deal. And I wonder if that's why Daniel refused, or it was the dietary restrictions of the law. It could be either one. I just put this forward to you as a possibility of why Daniel refused the king's food. So what happened? He said, let's test for 10 days. And this is how the chapter 1 ends. Chapter 1, verse 14 through 21. So he listened to them in this matter, Ashpenaz did, and he tested them for 10 days. And at the end of 10 days, their appearance seemed better, and they were fatter than all the youths who had been eating the king's choice food. So the overseer continued to withhold their choice food and the wine they were to drink, and kept giving them vegetables. As for these 4 youths, God gave them knowledge and intelligence in every branch of literature and wisdom. Daniel even understood all kinds of visions and dreams. Then at the end of the days, which the king had specified for presenting them, the commander of the officials presented them before Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and out of them not one was found like Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the king's personal service. As for the matter of wisdom and understanding, about which the king consulted them, he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and the conjurers who were in all his realm. And Daniel continued until the 1st year of Cyrus the king. So that's how chapter 1 opens. God blessed Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. These young men brought, as young, I think they were young teenagers, brought into a foreign land with foreign gods. And yet, in spite of all the adversity that they had before them, they didn't compromise. They did not get sucked into that. They stayed and lived separately, even though they lived in this idolatrous land. And they stayed faithful to God's commandment, living separate from the world. So there's a little bit about Daniel. Again, if you want to take a screenshot with your camera, while here's the readings for review that we looked at tonight. You have the land of Shinar, the different verses that we looked at with that. Again, Isaiah chapters 45, 46, 47, 48. The first chapter of Daniel, of course. Isaiah 39, 5 through 7, Matthew 19, 12. For dietary restrictions from the law of Moses, there's the sections in Leviticus and Deuteronomy. For the eating food sacrificed to idols, here are verses in the Bible regarding that practice that you can look at. And also we looked at Appendix 1, the Jerusalem Chronicle, the Nabonidus Chronicle, the Nabonidus Cylinder, the Cyrus Cylinder, and then the Apocryphal writings, the letter of Jeremiah. And you got to read Bel and the Dragon. Have fun, read that story. It's a great story. So that's a little bit of readings, a little light reading. If you want to read it, you're welcome to. If not, that's fine too. But that's a little bit about tonight on this story of the first chapter of Daniel, closing out the true God versus the gods of Babylon. And next time we're going to go into segment 4. We're going to get into Daniel chapter 2. And we are going to get into the first, what I believe is the first end times prophecy, the first time where we start looking at some eschatology in the book of Daniel. And we'll do that in session 4. All right.